Have you ever watched someone erase you while you're still alive? Not by blocking your path or speaking your name with anger, but by behaving as though your existence belongs to another lifetime. As though every memory you built together dissolved without leaving a single fingerprint. The most disturbing part isn't that they left. It's how effortlessly they seem to continue breathing in a world where you no longer exist. You begin questioning whether the laughter was real, whether the promises meant anything, whether you imagined an entire chapter of your life. Their silence becomes louder than every conversation you ever shared, and their indifference starts rewriting your memories from the inside. It feels impossible because your mind assumes that if something mattered deeply to you, it must have mattered equally to them. But human psychology rarely works that way. Sometimes the greatest emotional wound isn't rejection. It's becoming invisible to someone who once knew everything about you. What makes this experience so psychologically devastating is that the human brain depends on continuity. We build our identity by connecting yesterday to today, expecting people who shared our lives to carry at least a fragment of those experiences with them. When someone suddenly behaves as if those moments have disappeared, your brain isn't simply mourning a relationship. It's struggling to understand how reality itself changed without warning. You aren't asking why they left anymore. You're asking how an entire history could vanish so completely. That question lingers because memory, to us, feels sacred. We assume shared experiences create permanent emotional marks. Yet memories are not stored equally by everyone. Two people can live through the exact same moments while assigning completely different emotional weight to them. One walks away carrying a permanent scar. The other carries nothing more than another page already forgotten. This is where most people begin blaming themselves. They imagine they weren't attractive enough, interesting enough, or valuable enough to deserve remembrance. But the truth is often more unsettling than personal failure. Human beings naturally protect the version of reality that allows them to move forward. When someone chooses a different future, their mind slowly reorganizes the past to support that decision. The relationship doesn't necessarily disappear because it lacked meaning. Sometimes it fades because remembering it with full emotional intensity would make leaving unbearable. Forgetting becomes emotionally convenient. Not because every memory is false, but because the brain constantly edits its own story to preserve internal consistency. We don't simply remember our lives. We reconstruct them every day. That reconstruction explains why two people can tell completely different stories about the same relationship and both genuinely believe they're telling the truth. One remembers years of loyalty, sacrifice, and emotional intimacy. The other remembers growing distance, incompatibility, and inevitable endings. Neither memory is necessarily invented. They are filtered through different emotional needs. Memory isn't a camera. It's an editor. It cuts scenes, changes emphasis, removes details, and rearranges emotional meaning until the past feels compatible with the present. By the time someone seems to have forgotten you, they may not be consciously pretending. Their own mind has gradually rewritten the emotional script they now believe. This is why indifference often feels colder than hatred. Hatred still acknowledges significance. Anger requires emotional investment. Resentment still recognizes that another person occupies mental space. Indifference appears to erase that space entirely. To the one left behind, this feels impossible because your emotions remain active. Every place, every routine, every ordinary object continues reminding you of what existed. Meanwhile, they appear untouched by those same reminders. The imbalance creates the illusion that one heart was genuine while the other was empty from the beginning. But psychology suggests something more complicated. Emotional recovery rarely moves at the same pace. One person may process grief while still inside the relationship. The other only begins grieving after everything has already ended. That difference changes everything. While you believed both of you were sharing the same emotional timeline, you may actually have been living in completely different psychological realities. Sometimes emotional distance develops quietly over months or even years without becoming visible on the surface. By the time separation finally happens, one person's grieving process is nearly complete while the other's has only just begun. From the outside, it looks like remarkable emotional coldness. From the inside, it is often the final chapter of a process that started long before anyone recognized it. There is another reason their behavior feels almost inhuman. Your brain interprets emotional recognition as proof of existence. Every conversation, every shared glance, every familiar habit reassures you that you matter in another person's internal world. When that recognition disappears overnight, it creates something psychologists sometimes describe as a rupture in relational identity. You don't merely lose another person. You lose the version of yourself that existed through their eyes. Suddenly you no longer know who you are without the reflections they once provided. That is why the pain feels strangely existential. You aren't just mourning someone else. You're mourning the disappearance of a self that only existed inside that relationship. Ironically, the more emotionally invested someone becomes, the harder it is for them to imagine being forgotten. Deep attachment creates an assumption of permanence. We instinctively believe that emotional intensity leaves permanent marks on everyone involved. Yet permanence exists only if both people experience the relationship through the same emotional lens. When emotional investment differs, the future looks completely different from each perspective. One person expects lifelong echoes. The other experiences temporary chapters. Neither realizes this difference until silence reveals it. This is also why people often search endlessly for hidden explanations. They imagine there must have been another person, another secret, another betrayal capable of explaining such complete emotional disappearance. Sometimes there is. Often there isn't. The human mind simply dislikes uncertainty. It would rather believe in dramatic causes than accept that emotional priorities gradually changed without a single defining event. Slow emotional drift feels almost impossible to accept because stories are easier to understand when they contain villains. Reality often contains only changing emotional landscapes that neither person fully understood while they were living through them. Notice something unsettling about memory. It isn't only the person who left whose memories begin changing. Yours change too. As weeks pass, your mind starts replaying conversations with new meanings, searching for clues that never seemed important before. Ordinary moments become evidence. Small pauses become warnings. Innocent expressions become hidden signals. You aren't remembering the past anymore. You're investigating it. Every recollection becomes another attempt to solve an emotional mystery that refuses to provide a satisfying ending. The relationship transforms into a puzzle your mind believes it can eventually complete if only it reviews enough details. That search rarely ends because closure is not hidden inside old memories. The past cannot explain itself differently simply because it is examined more intensely. Every revisit only strengthens the emotional pathways already associated with loss. The mind mistakes repetition for progress, believing another cycle of reflection will finally uncover the missing answer. Instead, it quietly deepens the wound by keeping the emotional experience permanently active. Perhaps the hardest realization comes much later. One day you recognize that the person who now behaves as though you never existed is not exactly the same person who once held your hand, shared your dreams, or knew your fears. Time reshapes identity far more than people notice. The version of them you miss belonged to a different psychological landscape. Just as you have changed through pain, they have changed through distance. Neither of you remained frozen inside those memories. The tragedy is not simply that they forgot. It is that both of you continued becoming different people while expecting the past to remain untouched. And maybe that is the most haunting truth of all. We assume relationships end with a conversation, a goodbye, or a final moment together. But psychologically, many relationships end much later, In silence, when one person finally realizes they are carrying memories that no longer exist anywhere else. The photographs inside your mind remain vivid, yet the other person has rearranged their inner world until those same moments occupy almost no space at all. Nothing about that feels fair. Nothing about it feels logical. But human memory was never designed to preserve every emotional chapter forever. It was designed to help us survive the next one. That is why the deepest wound isn't discovering that someone stopped loving you. It is realizing they eventually stopped organizing their inner world around your existence. The routines changed. The thoughts changed. The future changed. Eventually, even the emotional echoes became quieter. Meanwhile, you were still walking through rooms filled with invisible versions of them, speaking to memories that could no longer answer. The painful irony is that the person who seems to have erased you may never have consciously decided to do so at all. Their mind simply kept moving forward while yours kept looking back. And somewhere between those two directions, an entire shared life became two completely different stories, one still being relived, and one that quietly disappeared into the silence where forgotten people seem to go.